Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often.
They don't have FTL ships? That can't be true. I wouldn't think they'd be accepted on the council if they didn't have the means to attend the meetings,
said Orgo, the Trodarian ambassador, on his first day on the Galactic Council's administrative planet. The grand corridors of the Council's central administrative building stretched upward for what seemed like miles, its transparent dome allowing the passage of the light of the red star, reducing it into rainbow patterns projected across the clean white floor. Around them, representatives of dozens of species moved about, their varied forms and colors a perfect example of how different planets could support life and produce such different creatures.
Is this true?
Zinir, an Aquarian with a backpack filled with water and tubes connecting to his neck, replied. He touched his blue skin filled with white dots to ensure it was moisturized, and only then he completed his explanation.
I can assure you humans don't have spaceships.
Zinir's large eyes, each a bright pool of blue, carefully studied the Trodarian's reaction. Unlike some species whose skin changed colors with emotion, Orgo's green complexion remained steadfast. However, the ambassador's long, tapered ears, normally held high and proud, now drooped noticeably toward his shoulders. His previously relaxed posture stiffened, and his gaze intensified, the yellow irises contracting to thin slits as he processed the seemingly impossible information. The protruding tusks touching his chin, curving from the upper corner of his mouth, pressed against his skin.
Then they must have some sort of arrangement with other species to transport them to meetings,
Orgo suggested, his voice dropping to a confidential tone.
Such arrangements make sense to me. Perhaps the humans are terrible at engineering but compensate with other valuable skills or resources.
He gestured quickly, nearly striking a passing Volari diplomat, who chirped indignantly and fluttered away on gossamer wings. They stood in one of the main thoroughfares of the administrative building, a wide corridor with soaring ceilings and walls embedded with living bioluminescent organisms that glowed from alcoves. The passage was busy with the afternoon traffic of diplomats, aides, and bureaucrats. Smiling, Zinir replied,
Humans do have their own means to attend the meetings. It just happens that their means don't involve spaceships at all.
Water bubbled through the tubing connecting to his neck as he spoke, a sign of amusement among Aquarians. Zinir watched as Orgo's face twisted in strange configurations. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. His forehead ridges contracted and expanded rapidly, and his nostrils flared to twice their normal size. Yet, despite this facial acrobatics, the Trodarian said nothing. Zinir loved this part of his job. As an interspecies relationship assistant, he was responsible for providing training to new ambassadors every day, helping them navigate the complex web of cultural protocols and biological peculiarities that made up the Galactic Council. Introducing new ambassadors to humans was always the highlight of his day. He had done it dozens of times already, but the fun he had with their shock never diminished, a vindication of his own first day, when he had experienced the very same disbelief.
Enough of these riddles,
Orgo finally snapped, his long ears stiff, as rigid as they could.
You are just an interspecies assistant, not some cosmic judge who gives puzzles to ambassadors to solve. Explain what you mean, or direct me to someone who will speak plainly.
His voice rose enough that several passing dignitaries turned to look, and a security drone briefly oriented its sensors in their direction before determining no intervention was necessary. This was one of the typical reactions Zinir encountered when having fun with the shock of the ambassadors. Some expressed genuine and humble curiosity, interested in learning something new about the mysterious humans. Others simply didn't believe him, assuming it was some sort of initiation prank or test. And then there were those like Orgo, who couldn't contain their anger when confronted with information that challenged their understanding of the universe. Zinir only smiled, his lips parted to reveal rows of small, pearlescent teeth. He already had a preferred way to deal with the angry ones.
"I could show you how humans travel through space,"
Zinir offered, his voice smoothly transitioning to a more professional tone.
"A demonstration would be much more enlightening than any explanation I could provide."
He carefully hid the fact that a previous explanation would very likely soften the blow when Orgo finally witnessed the humans' method of space travel. But where would the fun be in that? The moment of pure shock was worth preserving, and even more so to the angry ones.
"Show me."
Orgo's anger quickly transitioned into interest, his ears relaxing slightly.
"Yes, I would be interested in seeing that. When can this be arranged?"
"Follow me,"
Zinir instructed.
"but do so discreetly, without attracting attention."
He checked the moisture of his face once more, running webbed fingers over the small white dots that dotted his blue skin. Satisfied with their suppleness, he continued.
"We're going to tail a human so that you can see it with your own eyes."
"Tail?"
Orgo asked, visibly uncomfortable.
"Isn't that dangerous? My species considers observation without disclosure to be deeply offensive. If they discovered us watching them—"
Zinir laughed again, the sound bubbling through his respiratory tubes.
"Oh, it would be very dangerous,"
he agreed with exaggerated seriousness, then pointed toward a distant figure moving through the crowd.
"See that human there? That's George, a human scientist. If he spots us, we'll lose at least 10 minutes to introductions, small talk, and detailed updates about his favorite football team. Whatever that is. No one has had the courage to ask him to explain the concept further, since he won't stop talking about it."
Orgo stared in the direction Zinir pointed, squinted his yellow eyes to make out the figure in the distance. The human appeared unremarkable when compared to other species. A bipedal being with brownish skin and dark curly hair atop its head, dressed in what appeared to be typical human attire. Nothing about the creature suggested its apparently unique approach to interstellar travel. The Trodarian didn't understand a word of what Zinir had explained about. Football? But before he could ask, Zinir had already taken the lead, gesturing for Orgo to follow.
"I'm certain George is about to go back home,"
Zinir whispered, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the corridor.
"This is the perfect time to follow him to the human chamber."
"Human chamber?"
Orgo repeated, falling into step beside Zinir as they began to trail the unexpected human at a safe distance.
"What is this chamber? Some kind of experimental facility?"
"You'll see,"
Zinir responded cryptically, his eyes fixed on George's retreating form. They followed George through the winding corridors of the administrative complex, maintaining a careful distance. The human moved with no hurry, occasionally stopping to exchange greetings with various species. Once, he paused to assist a struggling Malurian, whose gravity adjustment device had malfunctioned, leaving the amorphous being partially stuck to the floor. George fixed the device with a quick adjustment and continued on his way.
"Are all humans so helpful?"
Orgo whispered as they ducked behind a decorative column of living coral.
"Most of them, yes,"
Zinir confirmed.
"They seem to have an instinctive desire to solve problems."
They continued their pursuit, winding through less populated areas of the complex. The architecture gradually shifted from the grand, ceremonial style of the public spaces to a more utilitarian design. The lighting dimmed, and the corridors narrowed.
Why are there not more humans in the council?
Orgo asked as they paused at an intersection, waiting for George to choose his path.
There are many,
Zinir replied, keeping his voice low.
but, as you'll see, they return home every day, and don't stay in this planet for long periods like other species do.
And this chamber we're heading to, it's what, exactly?
Patience, Ambassador,
Zinir urged as George turned down a less travelled corridor.
We're almost there.
The hallway they now followed was nearly deserted, its walls a plain, unadorned metal rather than the decorative materials used in the main complex. At the end of the corridor stood a simple door marked with both standard galactic glyphs and strange, angular symbols that Orgo assumed must be human writing. George approached the door, then suddenly paused and glanced behind him, as if sensing he was being followed. Zinir quickly pulled Orgo into a recessed alcove, pressing them both against the wall as the human's gaze swept the corridor.
That was close,
Zinir whispered as George, apparently satisfied that he was alone, turned back to the door and placed his hand on a scanner. The door slid open, and the human disappeared inside.
Will we follow him in?
Orgo asked, his heart racing with anticipation. Zinir shook his head.
We won't need to. The chamber has a translucent section where we can observe without entering. Come.
Taking the lead again, Zinir guided them past the main entrance to the side passage that curved around the chamber. At the end of this passage was a small viewing area with a clear wall that looked into the chamber itself. Zinir watched as shock registered in Orgo's eyes. Behind the transparent barrier was a simple, nearly empty room lined with rows of what appeared to be locker compartments. They observed George casually removing his coat and shoes, storing them in one of the compartments before closing it securely.
What am I seeing?
Orgo demanded, voice rising with frustration.
I'm not interested in learning human clothing rituals. I want to know how they travel through space without ships.
Just keep watching,
Zinir instructed, struggling to contain his amusement. George now stood in the center of the room, alone and seemingly doing nothing special. He tapped a button on a device strapped to his wrist, and suddenly a white light began blinking from the small apparatus. Orgo opened his mouth to speak, but his words were cut short as a brilliant purple light suddenly flared, overwhelming their senses. For a moment, both Zinir and Orgo were forced to shield their eyes. When the light faded and they could see again, the chamber was empty. George had vanished into thin air.
What?
Orgo stammered, pressing closer to the transparent barrier.
Where did he?
The Trodarian ambassador ran his hands over the viewing panel as if expecting to find a trick, some hidden mechanism that would explain what he had just witnessed.
That's impossible. He can't have just vanished.
Orgo paced to the small viewing area, his long ears now fully erect with alarm.
There must be a hidden door or holographic illusion. Perhaps a gas that induced a momentary hallucination? Or maybe the transparent barrier isn't actually transparent, but a sophisticated display.
He tapped the barrier experimentally, confirming its solid nature.
This can't be,
he continued, his voice growing more frantic as he sought rational explanations.
No being can simply vanish from existence in one place and what? Reappear somewhere else?
Zinir waited patiently as the Trodarian cycled through various explanations, each more desperate than the last. He had seen this reaction before, the mind struggling to reconcile what the eyes had witnessed with what was believed to be impossible.
Perhaps they've discovered a way to create localized wormholes,
Orgo theorized, his scientific training evidently taking over.
A manipulation of space-time that allows for instantaneous transition between two fixed points?
He trailed off, looking to Zinir with an almost pleading expression.
Tell me what I just saw.
You saw teleportation, Zinir stated simply, allowing the word to hang in the air between them. Orgo's mouth opened and closed silently before he finally managed.
But that's
impossible, according to the unified theories of physics as understood by 77 out of 78 species of the Galactic Council. Yes, it should be. Zinir's tone was matter-of-fact, tinged with the slight superiority of one who has already processed and accepted an uncomfortable truth. And yet, the humans do it routinely.
How?
The single word contained all of Orgo's bewilderment. That is the fascinating part, Zinir explained, leaning against the wall of the viewing area, his water pack gurgling softly as he adjusted his posture. Both humans and other species of the Council have similar approaches to basic science. Our understanding of fundamental physics, chemistry, and biology aligns remarkably well, until we reach basic quantum theory. Orgo nodded slowly, beginning to comprehend.
And at that point, our paths diverge.
Precisely, Zinir confirmed. Humans and the other species each discovered their own solution to quantum theory of gravity. The solutions are so fundamentally different that even after 20 years of collaboration, our respective scientists still struggle to understand each other's approaches.
So, we developed faster-than-light travel based on our understanding of quantum gravity,
Orgo began. And the humans developed teleportation based on theirs, Zinir finished. They can instantaneously transport themselves across vast distances without ships. However, they cannot build vessels that travel faster than light, just as we cannot teleport. Orgo stood silent for a long moment, processing this revelation.
It seems impossible that two intelligent species could develop such divergent technologies from studying the same universe.
77 species, Zinir corrected gently. All 77 non-human species in the Council developed variants of the same basic FTL technology, with cultural and technological differences, of course, but all based on the same fundamental understanding of gravity. Only humans took this entirely different path.
That's, unsettling,
Orgo admitted. It challenges our understanding of objective reality, Zinir agreed. It suggests that the universe might be more complex, more open to interpretation than we previously believed.
That's dangerously close to mysticism,
Orgo objected, his scientific training evidently taking offense. Maybe, Zinir conceded, but when faced with observable phenomena that contradicts our understanding of physics, we must either expand our theories or ignore evidence. Science chooses the former. Orgo turned back to the empty chamber, staring at the spot where George had disappeared.
I would like to learn more about this.
I can take you to where human scientists and those from other species are still trying to reconcile their theories, Zinir offered, but I must warn you, the debates there are several times more heated than even the arguments between fighters of different species in the common training room. Do you really want to go there? The Trodarian's ears straightened with determination as he turned to face Zinir.
Yes. If I am to represent my people on this council, I must understand all aspects of its member species, even those that defy my comprehension.
Zinir smiled, pleased with the ambassador's reaction. Very well, the Aquarian agreed, checking his moisture levels once more. As they turned to leave the viewing area, Orgo paused for one last look at the empty chamber.
No ships,
he murmured, shaking his head in continued disbelief. Together, they walked away from the human chamber, Orgo's mind racing with questions and Zinir already anticipating the Trodarian's reaction to what would come next. The true shock, after all, wasn't that humans could teleport, it was that no other species could understand how. They walked in silence for several minutes, Orgo still processing what he had witnessed. The hallways they traversed were less crowded now, as many ambassadors and representatives had retired to their quarters or meeting rooms for afternoon sessions. Their footsteps echoed against the floor as Zenir led them deeper into the administrative complex.
"Where exactly are we going?"
Orgo finally asked, his long ears twitching with nervous energy. "You'll see," Zenir replied, touching his skin to check its moisture level. The blue of his complexion had deepened slightly, indicating excitement. "There's something you should witness firsthand if you truly want to understand the relationship between humans and the rest of the Galactic Council." They passed through a series of security checkpoints, where guards of various species nodded respectfully to Zenir. After navigating several more corridors and taking a gravity lift to a lower level, they found themselves facing a massive door. Unlike the elegant entrances elsewhere in the complex, this one was reinforced with what appeared to be multiple layers of metal. "This leads to what we call the Teleportation Lecture Hall," Zenir explained, gesturing toward the imposing entrance. "It's where our leading minds attempt to reconcile the two theories of gravity, the one developed by humans and the one shared by the rest of us." Orgo stepped forward eagerly, his hand reaching for the door's control panel. His curiosity had overtaken his diplomatic caution. Before he could touch the panel, however, Zenir grabbed his shoulder with surprising strength and pulled him back. "I wouldn't recommend entering," the Aquarian warned, his grip firm. "It would be better if we observe through that gap." He pointed to a narrow fissure where the door frame had slightly separated from the wall, clearly the result of some past violent incident rather than an intentional design feature.
"I don't understand," Orgo said, frowning. "Why wouldn't we enter? I'm an ambassador. Surely I'm permitted to observe scientific discussions?"
Zenir's expression turned serious, the bubbles in his neck tubes accelerating, with what Orgo was beginning to recognize as agitation. "This is where 3 duels to the death have occurred. 1 ear was bitten off, and perhaps most surprisingly, 1 interspecies marriage originated. We'd better stay clear for our own safety."
"Duels to the death?"
Orgo scoffed, the ridges on his forehead contracting with disbelief.
"I expected the Galactic Council to be a civilized place where differences are resolved through diplomatic means."
But then Zenir's words fully registered, and Orgo's ears flattened against his head in shock.
"Wait, what do you mean by duels to the death and interspecies marriage? Isn't this just a place for scientists to exchange ideas?"
Zenir laughed, the sound bubbling through his respiratory tubes like water through a narrow channel. "Oh, they exchange much more than ideas," he urged Orgo closer to the gap in the wall. "See for yourself." Cautiously, Orgo approached the fissure and peered through. The room beyond was vast and arranged like an amphitheater, with tiered seating descending toward a central stage area. Unlike the ordinary arrangement one might expect from a scientific forum, however, the space had been divided into opposing camps. On one side sat a group of humans in varying attire, their faces animated with frustration. Facing them was an assortment of scientists from at least a dozen different species, their diverse biological features all displaying signs of agitation, recognizable even to Orgo's untrained eye. The voices from both sides were raised to near shouting levels, with occasional bursts of untranslated expressions that the universal translators struggled to process. "Fundamentally misunderstanding the basic premise," a human scientist with silver hair was shouting, jabbing her finger at a complex equation hovering in the space between the groups.
"It is not we who misunderstand,"
retorted a Malurian scientist, its amorphous body rippling with what appeared to be indignation.
"Your approach is primitive and lacks mathematical rigor."
"Primitive?" another human responded, rising from his seat.
Your entire framework relies on assumptions that can't be empirically verified.
Zinir leaned close to Orgo's ear, speaking softly beneath a cacophony of scientific disagreement.
Both theories of gravity have a single point in their mathematical proofs that each side claims is intuitive, he explained. The humans say they don't need to prove it any more than they need to prove that 2 + 2 = 4. Our species claim that the way space can be warped is so obvious that a 5-year-old toddler should understand it.
On the stage, a tool being had taken over the Malurian, drawing complex patterns in the air that the holographic system captured and displayed. If you would simply accept the self-evident nature of trans-dimensional curvature—
Self-evident?
interrupted a human with a short, dark beard.
There's nothing self-evident about it. It contradicts everything we've directly observed.
Only in your limited perceptual framework,
shouted someone from the back of the alien contingent. Zinir continued his explanation as they watched the increasingly heated exchange. This is such a point of contention that even our respective AI systems can't keep the conversation civilized. After exchanging hundreds of messages attempting to bridge the gap in understanding, they inevitably end up labeling each other's reasoning as primitive or illogical.
Fascinating,
Orgo murmured, watching as a small hovering drone moved to separate 2 scientists, one human and one insectoid, who appeared on the verge of physical confrontation.
Perhaps the humans truly do think fundamentally differently in some way.
That's the conclusion many species have reached after decades of wasted time and fruitless debate,
Zinir agreed, absently touching his wet face. They watched for several more minutes as the debate cycled through increasingly technical arguments, each side growing more frustrated with the other's inability to grasp what they considered obvious.
So,
Orgo finally asked, turning away from the spectacle, his tone now carrying the kind of genuine curiosity that only someone who had already accepted that humans didn't need ships could express.
About those duels and that marriage, what happened exactly?
Zinir smiled, pleased with how quickly the ambassador was adapting to new information. Many took far longer to move past denial.
Different species deal with impossible contradictions in different ways, he explained. The duel happened because the heated arguments and exchange of insults wounded some egos.
And, the marriage?
Orgo asked hesitantly.
Ah, that was between a human physicist and a Lyconian mathematician,
Zinir replied, his tone warming.
They decided that if they couldn't resolve their differences through academic debate, perhaps a lifetime of conversations would bring understanding. They're still married, still arguing, and still publishing papers refuting each other's work. Quite romantic, in its weird way.
That's, more than weird,
Orgo said, his ears twitching in confusion.
Agreed.
Zinir nodded, urging them away from the door.
We should leave before they notice us and try to involve us in their arguments. Once they learn you're new to the council, both sides will compete to indoctrinate you before you've heard the other perspective.
As they walked away, the sound of scientific dispute gradually faded behind them. Orgo remained silent for several moments, his gait slower as he processed what he had witnessed.
I'm beginning to accept that teleportation is possible, even if I don't understand how,
he finally admitted.
But aren't the humans afraid that other species might attack their homeworld with ships, since they can't travel through space conventionally? Wouldn't they be vulnerable to orbital bombardment or blockade?
Zinir glanced at Orgo with new appreciation. The Trodarian was more perceptive than he initially appeared. Most ambassadors took days or even weeks to consider the military implications. They were too caught up in the philosophical and scientific shock of teleportation.
That's an excellent question,
Zinir replied.
And one I can also explain. There's one last place I'd like to show you today.
Lead on,
Orgo said with unexpected ease.
after all I've seen today. I doubt I'll be easily impressed by anything else.
Zinir laughed, a burbling sound through his tubes. We'll see about that, he said. They took a series of rapid transit tubes to a different section of the complex, emerging in an area Orgo hadn't seen during his orientation. After passing through multiple checkpoints, each requiring Zinir's biometric confirmation, they reached a large automatic door that slid open as they approached. Beyond was a vast chamber filled with rows of workstations, each occupied by an operator from a different species. The walls were lined with massive screens and bright displays showing star charts, ship movements, and what appeared to be tactical readouts. Orgo looked around in amazement. Some screens displayed real-time feeds from what could only be deep space observation platforms.
What am I seeing here?
He asked, turning to Zinir for explanation. Then, recognizing the distinctive patterns on several screens, he added,
Is this some sort of space observation operation?
Very perceptive, Zinir confirmed, leading Orgo to a central platform that offered a better view of the entire operation. This facility is jointly operated by representatives from all Council species. What you're seeing is the monitoring center for the encirclement of the Sol system, Earth's solar system.
Encirclement?
Orgo repeated, his ears stiffening in alarm. Yes, Zinir continued, gesturing toward a large central display that showed hundreds of ships positioned at strategic points throughout a star system. The construction and maintenance of this operation was agreed upon by every single species in the Council. He paused meaningfully. Except the humans. Orgo's yellow eyes widened with shock.
Are we planning to go to war with them because they lack spaceships to defend themselves?
Zinir laughed loudly, the water in his pack sloshing as his body shook. No, quite the opposite, actually. He gestured toward the display showing the hundreds of ships positioned at strategic points. The purpose of this operation is to ensure that no species attempts to attack the humans under any circumstances.
I don't understand,
Orgo said, staring at the display in confusion.
This looks incredibly expensive to maintain. Look how many ships are stationed in empty space.
He pointed to clusters of vessels positioned at what appeared to be random points between planetary orbits.
Why are we so worried that someone would attack the humans?
Zinir's expression grew serious, the amusement draining from his features. When humanity joined the Council 20 years ago, a Vexarian diplomat made what they thought was a harmless joke during the welcoming ceremony. She said humans saved time with their teleportation, but would be helpless if a fleet attacked them from space. He paused, checking his skin moisture again. The human representative smiled and replied that no one would do that unless they wanted bombs materializing inside their homeworlds and exploding. Fear visibly coursed through Orgo's expression. His ears flattened completely against his head, and his tusks ground together audibly as the implications dawned on him.
They threatened...
The humans didn't just introduce teleportation to the Galactic Council, Zinir continued before Orgo could finish his thought. They also introduced the concept of mutual assured destruction, the idea that peace is maintained when both sides know that attacking would result in their own annihilation, and they are uncannily certain that this approach works as a means of maintaining peace. He gestured around the room, where dozens of operators continued their work, seemingly untroubled by the enormity of what they were monitoring. The rest of the galaxy thinks differently. We decided collectively to protect Earth at all costs, just so no species ever does anything stupid.
The humans know about this defense network, of course, but they consider it unnecessary. They call it our security blanket and tolerate it for now.
But could they really...
Orgo began, his voice trembling slightly.
We don't know, Zinir admitted frankly. No one has been willing to test whether humans can actually teleport weapons across interstellar distances. Perhaps they can't. Perhaps the threat was a bluff based on theoretical capabilities they haven't yet developed.
He lowered his voice.
But maybe they can. After all, if their tech allows them to teleport themselves anywhere in the galaxy, what would prevent them from teleporting other objects? The possibility alone is too great a risk.
Orgo studied the tactical displays with new understanding. The ships weren't positioned to contain humans. They were positioned to intercept any potential aggressor. The entire operation existed not because the Council feared humans, but because they feared what might happen if humans were attacked.
I understand now,
he said quietly. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the complex movement of ships and sensors that maintained the protective envelope around humanity's home system. Orgo's world had been upended twice in a single day, first by the revelation that humans traveled without ships, and now by the understanding that this ability had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy.
I think, he said finally, that I'm ready to be a proper ambassador now. I understand the delicate equilibrium we must maintain with the humans.
Zinir smiled, patting Orgo's shoulder with a damp hand.
Not quite yet, he said cheerfully.
Your day is far from over. Humans may be strange, but you still have much to learn about the Council's full diversity.
What do you mean?
Orgo asked, his ears perking up again.
Humans are the top one weirdest species of the Council, Zinir explained.
But your day will still be very long as we explore collective hive minds and the planet eaters.
You won't be a proper ambassador until you've learned about all three of them.
Planet eaters?
Orgo replied weakly.
Fascinating cultures,
Zinir assured him, leading him back toward the exit as he explained. As they left the monitoring center, Zinir observed Orgo's changed expression with satisfaction. The Trodarian was adapting faster than most ambassadors he'd trained. In a single day, Zinir had watched Orgo's worldview transform completely, from disbelief to acceptance to cautious curiosity.
I assumed this position would involve navigating cultural differences and trade agreements,
Orgo confessed as they walked.
Not reconsidering the fundamental nature of reality.
Zinir laughed, feeling the water bubble through his tubes. This is why he loved his job, watching others experience the same journey of discovery he once had. Humans had a way of reminding everyone how little they actually understood about the universe.
Ready for the planet eaters, then?
Zinir asked, already calculating which routes would avoid the cafeteria during feeding time. Orgo's ears straightened with determination.
Lead the way. They can't be weirder than the humans.
Zinir smiled in agreement. Today was going exceptionally well.